Welcome to Influence, a book lovers podcast hosted by book besties Tegan and Amanda.
Here at Influenced, we cover books we've been influenced to read thanks to the internet, as well as books that have influenced us.
This podcast will talk about books ranging in age demographics, including adult content. Plus, we've been known to swear a time or two, so keep that in mind in case you have others around you. With that said, we're happy you're here.
We were influenced to read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, which was released in 2023 by St. Martin Publishing Group. It is just over 106,700 words, which will take the average reader, based on 250 words per minute, approximately 7 hours and 6 minutes to read. Since the book is pretty new, right now there are no film or TV adaptations in the works, but personally I would not be surprised to see if something comes in the future, and I hope it does. You will find with Rebecca Ross books that she tends to write a lot of duologies. She has a few other ones, including The Queen Rising and The Elements of Cadence, which the first book is an ever popular book that you might have seen on your social media feeds called A River Enchanted. So if you haven't read Divine Rivals yet, no worries. We will start with a spoiler-free overview, and we will give you a fair warning before we get into too much detail and discussion.
I'll start us off with a quick synopsis. Divine Rivals is a timeless romance with elements of magical realism, and it gives us a lot of historical fantasy vibes as we're reading. It takes place in a fictional world in the very, very late 1800s, right before the turn of the century. Our two main characters, Roman and Iris, are journalists, and they are competing for the same job. So they are rival coworkers. Oh my. Throughout the novel, the two of them bond over writing letters to each other that are delivered magically through a wardrobe. The twist is that Roman knows he's writing to Iris, but he's anonymous to her throughout a majority of the book. When I first started reading Divine Rivals, I thought it was basically You've Got Mail with journalists instead of bookstore owners, written with historical fantasy vibes taking place in a war setting, with a world that has a dose of magical realism and modern-day mythology. It was a lot to process. Honestly, my brain had a hard time allowing all of those things to exist in the same world and constructing that in my imagination. I got there, and once I got there, it was magical. I connected with this text in a really beautiful way, and I enjoyed reading it. Divine Rivals is told from second-person perspective. It switches between Roman and Iris's perspectives throughout the book, and it really has a good balance between being plot and character-driven.
So fun fact, I have never seen You've Got Mail. I have seen enough clips to assume I have seen most of the movie, but I've never actually seen that movie.
We're going to watch it together. You're going to make me read all these books for this podcast. I'm going to make you watch You've Got Mail. That seems fair to me.
I'm also a terrible classic movie watcher. I'm that person that will often be like, yeah, I've never seen it. I had never seen The Princess Bride until I was probably 27, maybe?
Wow.
It's time for Tegan and I to rate Divine Rivals. You might be wondering, how do we rate our books? We both have a very similar star format. If it is 5 stars, it is a great read that we would reread again, and any criticisms that we have are likely just personal issues that are not worthy of a deduction. A 4-star means we enjoyed it, but there were some minor issues that might have been worthy of that deduction in terms of plot, character, etc. 3 stars mean it was an enjoyable book overall, but we had some criticisms. If we give it 2 stars, we really did not like the book. There were glaring issues with both plot, characters, overall dynamics, those kind of things. And finally, you'll probably never hear a 1-star review on here because if it's that low, we DNF'd it. So Tegan, I want to know, what was your rating of Divine Rivals?
4.5. I was really on the fence between rating this 4.5 or 5 stars. I did end up deducting half a star. Honestly, chef's kiss to the pacing of this book. It was so fast-paced, so action-packed. The romance was very sweet. I enjoyed it. It wasn't predictable like we get with a lot of romance novels. And the aspect of these fictional gods was really cool. I was impressed that the author created these gods as fictional characters. But I wish there was some more context about the gods and their history and why this war is happening. I also had a minor issue with the ages of our characters. In the book, they're 18 to 20, but they read more like they're in their mid to late 20s to me.
I concur with everything you just said. Ditto to it all. My rating was also a 4.5 for those exact same reasons, including the age and wanting more of the gods. I do feel like there was something left to be desired in terms of the background with the gods and that story and the motivation for the war. We both have read Ruthless Vows, and if you really enjoyed Divine Rivals and feel like that was something that kind of left you hanging, I think you will enjoy book 2.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I will say I absolutely agree with the social media community that I was influenced to read this book, and it was completely worth the hype between the lovable characters, the plot, the dynamics between everybody. It was, like you said, chef's kiss, just beautiful.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have seen a lot of social media accounts tying this into Fourth Wing, saying, if you enjoyed Fourth Wing, read Divine Rivals, or if you have a Fourth Wing hangover, read Divine Rivals. I don't so much that I agree with the connection between the two, or like if you like one, you'll like the other. I think anybody who enjoys fantasy, romance, war setting would enjoy Divine Rivals. There's some grittiness. It's not as tragic as Fourth Wing. So if you're a tragedy chaser, you're not going to get that from this book as much.
Yeah, that's a good point. This book is also much more YA. It does fall into that young adult category, and we're going to talk about that later on when we get into our spoiler section. But I do think that obviously it was influential enough that we continued to go straight into the second book. I personally did not take a break with a different book in between these. I wanted the next one right away, and I finished the second one in a day.
I read the second one very quickly too. Actually, it came out on December 26th, the day after Christmas. I had finished Divine Rivals 2 days before then. And so I was at Target at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, December 26th to buy this book. They hadn't even shelved it yet. It was still sitting on the stocking cart.
Were you that person that had to go up there and be like, hey, can I get this, please?
Yes, there was an employee standing there. I asked, is it okay for me to take something off this cart? And she just kind of shrugged. I was like, I don't give a shit. So
I grabbed so millennial of you. Like, I don't want to go interact with somebody about this and be a nuisance.
Yes. But I got home with my book and immediately devoured it. So good.
I had no idea when the second one was being released. I knew it was upcoming, and I finished Divine Rivals the very first day of January this year. So I picked it up immediately and finished Ruthless Vows on my birthday.
Ah, what a good way to spend your birthday.
It really was. I was plenty happy to sit. So I would say that, these half-star deductions that we're taking off are pretty minor if we had that level of excitement for these.
All right. The last bit of non-spoiler content we have for you is Amanda and I are each going to describe the main characters in 3 words. So, Amanda, what 3 words would you use to describe Roman?
I love this activity, and I also hate it because it is so hard. But for Roman, I put enigmatic, protective, and confident.
Ooh, I like that. I almost put protective for Roman, but when I was really thinking about it, I decided to use egalitarian instead. He really seeks justice for everyone.
That's why we love him.
Yes. Okay, my other 2 words for him were playful and compassionate.
Yeah, I like those, especially playful. as his character develops. It's just fun to see that side of him.
I felt like it added a lot to their interaction.
I found myself reverting back to like 16-year-old me giggling while reading the book and just smiling and being so happy and just doing the little squeals.
Yes.
It's a book,
yes.
and yet I get too invested in these characters.
Same. So my 3 words for Iris were brave, stubborn, and passionate. What about you?
My words were sassy, empathetic, and determined.
Ooh, those are good. Especially
Right?
sassy. I like that.
You know, at the beginning of the book, she kind of gives introverted wallflower vibes. But then she interacts with Roman for the first time, and that sassiness comes out, and I loved it.
Yes, that's a really good way to describe it. She does come off just like she is shy and introverted, but dude, she is a firecracker.
And for everything she endures, she has to be, and just great.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, that is it for our spoiler free content for this episode. Now is the time when we are going to do more of a deep dive into the story and get into some discussion questions. So if you have not read the book and you do not want the ending to be spoiled, now is your time to stop listening. If you don't mind spoilers, by all means, join us further. Amanda, would you lead us off in our first discussion question?
Absolutely. So, this question came from me and my terrible book guessing skills when it comes to book plots. So, Tegan, what was your expectation for the plot when you started Divine Rivals?
Ooh, that's a good question. I knew going into this that it was an enemies to lovers trope. I normally like a true enemies to lovers trope, like assassins, something along those lines, not rival coworkers. So I didn't even know if I was going to like this, but going into it, both of the characters just swept me off my feet pretty early on. I think handwritten letters are so timeless and romantic, but typewritten letters just add a little bit of a whimsical nature. And I loved the origin story of their typewriters, that they were these, magical typewriters, as though the concept itself wasn't magical enough.
That element was beautiful. I also just love typewriters. I used to type on my mom's typewriter at her old job when she was a secretary, as computers were becoming more integrated in the workplace and she was using it less. And I would sit there at her desk and just type on this typewriter. Now, it was not the old school typewriter we're talking about in this book, but the feeling of the clickety clacks, and the paper moving and then having to bring it back. If you love writing, it brings this feeling of joy in you. Now, I will say my expectation for this book going in was very similar. I knew it was enemies to lovers. I agree with your assessment that this is not your typical enemies to lovers where, yes, they hate each other to an extent, but they still kind of respect each other for their workmanship and their contributions to the paper. So it does have a different enemies to lovers vibe. When I started reading, I was about 15% through the book, and I told myself in my mind, okay, I think I see where this is going for the book. I figured the book would take place in the city competing for this job with the war going on, and that they would maybe inadvertently get involved with the war, and that was where book 2 would go. And that Roman would get the job at the end, not due to his work ethic or his skills, but due to his status in society and or his father's help. And from that point, I assumed Iris would then take the war correspondent job, go off to the war front, and that's where we would end book 1. That was the first 25% of this book, and I was not expecting that. When Iris's mother dies, It's not that her death was too shocking, it was the time of her death that was shocking to me.
Mhm.
I really thought that if this character was going to meet a tragic end, that this would happen toward the end of the book. And when it happened at like that 25% mark, I had to sit the book down and redefine all my expectations and just decided, you know what? I'm not going to take any guesses anymore because I have no idea where this is going and I'm loving it.
Yes, Rebecca Ross really just threw us into the depths of all of this action and plot. I was really surprised by how much we got in this first book and how fast paced it was. It was really well done.
And that might be because, right, it's a duology and you have to condense down a lot of things. And I'm a big reader of big epic fantasy series that have a lot of action and detail that kind of spread out over pages more than what Divine Rivals does.
Yeah, you're more used to that trilogy arc than a duology. And I think I am too. This was a little bit different. Speaking of writing style, there's a dedication at the very beginning of this book where Rebecca Ross says a friend of hers read it and recommended that she write from Roman's point of view. Personally, I can't imagine this book without Roman's point of view. Do you think the book would have been just as good without it?
I don't think so. I do think it still would have been a good book, but the concept of anonymity and another main character end up being that person is not an unfamiliar trope to a lot of people.
Yes, I agree with you there. One thing that might have been a benefit of not having Roman's point of view is that he would have been just as anonymous to readers as he was to Iris. I think it would have been cool to read through the book with that being a mystery to me as well, and then finding out at the same time as Iris that it was Roman she was corresponding with the entire time. But I don't think that little nugget would be worth losing Roman's perspective throughout.
Mm-hmm.
His perspective contributed so much to this story.
Do you think that if she had not included his perspective at the beginning and didn't have a high level of involvement with Iris until his reveal, that would have maybe helped?
Potentially, it would have helped in the sense of keeping him a mystery to readers. But I'm going back to weighing the options between Roman being anonymous to us versus having Roman's perspective. And I think having his perspective was the right call for the author.
It would have been a very different book than this. And I think that dual perspective and very different characters helped launch this book into the success that it had.
Yes. And it also gave us that anticipation as readers of, oh, well, how is she going to react when she finds out? You know, we know what she doesn't know, and she's not going to be happy about it when she finds out.
And if anything, the use of her C's when she is describing Roman just enhances that. That was brilliant. All I could think about was Rebecca Ross using this thesaurus next to her or a digital version of it, wondering, okay, I have a word in my head that I'm using in this situation, but I need a C synonym for it, and having to dive into that research.
Yes, I actually made a list of all of those C's. I was so amused by it throughout. And for those of you who need a quick refresher of what we're talking about, Roman's full name is Roman Carver Kit. But Iris only has his middle initials, so she knows him as Roman C. Kit. And she makes up all of these adjectives for what his middle initial could stand for. He's like Roman, cheeky, churlish, cantankerous, conceited, coddled, confounded, competitive. I was amused by it.
When I was reading this, every time one of those would pop up, I made a note of it and just kept marking ha 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 over and over, because as soon as you think there can't be more that she could possibly use to describe him, there's another one.
Yep. And each time she used one, it was really fitting to the way he was behaving at the time. It fit in the context of the story really well. We've talked a lot about this period of time when Rowan was writing anonymously to Iris. Do you think he should have revealed himself to her sooner?
Ethically, yes. He absolutely should have revealed himself sooner. But as a reader, of course, we're glad he doesn't. I was glad to know that he did try to reveal himself when he really needed to, right? We learn at the end of this book when she is back at home, the letter she left on the floor before she left for the war front was Roman's letter saying that, Iris, this is Kit. Don't go anywhere. So that was kind of redeeming right there that he did try to reveal himself when it mattered, but should he have revealed himself sooner? Absolutely.
I'm really on the fence with this one. Ethically, yes, I think he should have told her sooner. I understand why he didn't, though. She kind of hated him. If he had revealed himself sooner, there was quite a big risk of her cutting him off. Even when she found out who he was and had a strong bond with him, she thought their romance through these letters was just a cruel trick. If he had told her sooner, that reaction may not have been as strong. She may not have had as many feelings wrapped up in it, but I think she still would have rejected him as her initial instinct.
I could picture if he had told her sooner, she would try to reject him, but because he is sort of persistent and kind of this confident individual, he would continue to play with her, essentially, with these letters through the wardrobe. And maybe we would have had a more traditional enemies to lovers type of storyline. But I do appreciate the way that this story went.
That is a really good point. Yeah, Roman could have just doubled down and still tried to get her with his whimsical, playful, witty behavior.
Right? Because we see throughout the book, she ends up falling for that as he's on the
Yes.
war front before she knows who he is. So I think that if he had done that, he still could have gotten her, but he definitely would have had to go a different route. Plus, Roman at the beginning of this book even compliments Iris's writing and recognizes that she is really talented and that he's surprisingly interested in her in different ways, maybe non romantically at the time, but is fascinated by her and her writing. Which makes me wonder, who do you think between Iris and Roman was the better writer?
Ooh, I like this question. And I'm immediately going to that scene in the book where Iris is helping Roman write his article. And she reads over it and says he's done a really good job reporting all of the facts, but there's no emotional appeal in his writing. So she helps him incorporate that. She helps him bring some feeling into the article that he's trying to write. As far as which one is better, I'm not sure. They bring a lot of balance to each other.
My mind also went to that scene. I do think Iris is probably the better writer and better with storytelling. But if we've learned anything from my time with Addie LaRue, I like to theorize about people and their intentions and who they are. And so I kept coming back to the idea that Roman was holding himself back in those moments and purposely not writing up to his full potential so he could have those interactions with Iris and be close to her. Because we see throughout this book in his letters to her that they are beautiful. He has emotion. He can put those in a letter and move your dang heart. But I think in this moment, he might have been playing it up just to get that one-on-one time with her.
Oh, I love that idea. And look who's being the hopeless romantic now.
I know, I'm not being a cynic this time.
So unlike you. In all seriousness, though, you mentioned Roman has sort of downplayed his talents. Yet throughout the book, Iris feels like Roman is trying to outshine her. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
In the beginning, sure, Roman is trying to outshine her because they both ultimately want this promotion for this better paying position that will give them benefits in their own way. For Iris, it's solely income and being able to provide for her and her mom. For Roman, it's more his father's approval and the status elevation that it gives him, but he ultimately doesn't care about that. But Iris doesn't know that, doesn't understand that, and she struggles to know what true attachment and love can feel like. I think she had that at the beginning, but in her recent time, Forrest, her brother, has left her for the war despite her not wanting him to go. Her mom has checked out emotionally and physically through addiction, and she is just taking care of herself and she is reliant only upon her. So she doesn't know what that feels like right now to be able to trust somebody else and rely on them. And so, yeah, she's going to think that he's outshining her, even though he's trying to reassure that that's not what he's trying to do.
You brought up a lot of really good points there, and I agree with everything you said. I think their socioeconomic status and their upbringing has a lot to play into this as well. Roman is upper class, he has a lot of status in society. And Iris's impression is that he excels in life because of his parents' money and influence. Whereas Iris is lower class, she's had to fight for and earn everything that she's gotten in life. And she truly feels like if she gets a win, if she excels, it's because people are taking pity on her. I think we're seeing that play out in her interactions with Roman. Anytime he offers her encouragement or praise, she thinks that he's toying with her, he's taking pity on her, or he's competing and trying to outshine her.
I love the writing about this element in the book and how different socioeconomic statuses can be so deeply ingrained into who we are as people and the reactions that we have. Because this was so deeply ingrained in her that even though she was falling in love with Roman, when that reveal comes around that he is C and is writing these letters, her initial reaction is that you are playing me and I do not trust this and this cannot be real.
Yes. But Roman didn't care about the differences in their socioeconomic statuses. We see it come into play a little bit because they're both naturally competitive due to their upbringings. They're both trying to be seen for their talents rather than the backgrounds that they come from. And it's funny that that comes up in their writing and when they're competing for this job. But when it comes to their feelings for each other, Roman does not care where she comes from or what her economic status is. He is in love with her.
I think this is a great point to make that fuck Roman's dad.
Absolutely. That guy is the worst.
As any time Roman had an interaction with his father, I wanted to go through the pages and punch a man. And I think that's a testament to Rebecca's writing about how universally hated this character was.
Anytime we have these strong emotions in a book like this, it is just a sign of good writing.
And it goes to show that just because you have a higher socioeconomic status, your family can be just as fucked up as everybody else's. And we especially saw this with Roman's family and his interactions together, especially after the death of his sister and the blame that he feels for it and the blame that his parents feel for it. And, Roman wouldn't trade the memories of his sister to ease his suffering. That's a big decision, and it was a beautiful decision and plays a role in this book and in this duology as a whole, but makes me wonder, would you in this situation do the same thing that Roman did and leave the trauma and the tragedy to keep the memories?
This question really plays into something we ask ourselves as humans quite frequently. Do you regret this thing? If you do, would you get rid of that experience? Would you take back the way you handled that situation or this thing that you were exposed to? I don't think I would personally, because through each of those experiences, all of the people I've crossed paths with throughout my life have helped me become who I am today. I would be a different person.
I think that it is easy to say no, but if that moment is presented to you while you are in the thickest grief of your life, I could see where, man, that would be so tempting. And my heart just hurt reading that moment.
Yes, that was painful to read and to know that Roman was in so much pain. He felt so much guilt about his sister's death, partially because, as you said, he blamed himself, but also because his parents blamed him. And that made it really tough. This decision to hold on to his memories, though, become important later in the book when Dacre takes Roman to the underworlds. Forrest has told us that Roman isn't going to remember anything, that Dacre is going to take his memories.
I
And
thought this was such a beautiful parallel. Something that you think is just a tragic backstory to Roman to give him some dynamicness to his character and ends up playing a thematic role at the end of this book just was heart-wrenching.
Mhm.
I also wondered with the dream that he had, with that offer to take away his suffering but have to forget his sister, he said it was a goddess. It makes me wonder if it was Enva and if she could do that. Now we know that Dacre has this ability and uses this for his army, essentially, to take away their pain and also take away their memories. But he specifically says it's the goddess, unless Dacre was coming to him in a dream in a different form to lay down who he is because he is a recognizable god and nobody knows who Enva is. I wonder if it was one of those two people coming to him in his dreams. This is one of those moments where I wish we had more context with the gods and that backstory, just a little bit more to solidify these ideas.
Yeah, I really wish there had been more context about the gods themselves.
Plus, we had this great background story about a fucking man being a terrible man and being possessive of Enva and the badassery that she had to do to escape that fate. And I feel like it got kind of glossed over for this motivation of war. And I get it. It's a duology book. You can't cover everything. And it makes sense logically that our stories about Iris and Roman, we don't need to go into those depths. But I love a good story with gods and politics.
Yes, it would have been really cool to have that context and just more depth, more layers. These gods feel like they're so complex, but we only have a little snippet of their story.
Perhaps also because this is a YA book, a lot of the dynamics between Enva and Dacre kind of follow a more adult fantasy vibe. It probably was a little bit of a darker story with him being so possessive and her sacrificing herself for her followers, essentially. So I think that there might be a line draw there with the genre of this. Now, I, as an adult, don't enjoy YA as much as I used to. Obviously, as a teenager, I was soaking up all the YA reads, all the fantasy YAs, what I thought was enemies to lovers, that now as an adult I realize, oh, poor naive child, you were just setting yourself up for a bigger and better road as an adult. But I do wonder if an adult version of this book would have had a different impact, for better or for worse. Where do you fall on the YA read and your enjoyment now as an adult? Because we're the same age.
I also used to read a lot of young adult in high school, even in college. It was really my early to mid 20s when I started steering away from that and more toward new adult and adult genre books. This one, though, didn't read so much like a YA to me, just because it didn't have some of those concepts that I find annoying in YA, if you will. Like the characters, although they were stated as being pretty young in this book, they were actually very mature.
I think it only classifies as YA because of the character's age and the basically non-spicy romance. I think YA books that are a little grittier like this, are a little darker, have more adult elements, those are the YAs that we will gravitate to because they still feel new adult.
Yes, absolutely. And even though the sex scene in this book wasn't incredibly spicy or really spicy at all, I really enjoyed it. Consent is so sexy, and the author did a really good job of bringing that into the scene for us. Roman was so gentle with Iris, respectful of her. He even told her if she wasn't ready, they could wait. They didn't have to have sex on their wedding night for the first time.
I loved that. Were you surprised that he was also a virgin?
No, I wasn't surprised by that.
I was. Maybe it's just
Really?
the books that we're reading nowadays. I was surprised. The other commendation that I have to give this book for being YA, besides the grittiness, is also the ethical dilemmas that you find yourself asking in this book, right? It is war, and it does a good job of not glossing over it too much between injuries and death, but also the staying or fleeing. You're a resident in a town and your home is about to be overrun. Do you flee or do you stay? And I feel like this book did an amazing job about not making me feel judgmental for someone's choice either way, because I don't think that there was a bad choice for anyone on each side. It truly was what was right for them, and nobody was going to harbor it against you if you chose to stay or chose to flee.
That makes me think of when they were being bombed in the trenches. The opposing side had encroached far enough that they had to retreat. And there was some really heavy, really intense reading during that time. So many injuries, so much blood. Roman and Iris had to remove themselves and get to safety because it was impossible to save everyone else. There were soldiers that they had to leave behind because it was impossible to grab them all and put them on lorries and take everyone to safety.
And we see these ethical dilemmas and decision making even at the end of the book with this twist and turn and cliffhanger ending with Forrest. We think that Iris is with her man and is getting away, and then come to find out that it was Forrest. I just want to say, screw Forrest. I hated Forrest. He made me so mad in this situation. I understand he was protecting his little sister, and that ultimately was the first priority for him. But as soon as she wanted to get away and get back to Roman and he wouldn't let her, I was off of the Forrest train. And it shows this difference between the two main men in her life. Forrest, who is not going to give her a choice, not going to give her an option, and is going to do what he wants to do in protection of her, versus Roman, who, yes, wants to protect her, but ultimately lets her have her choices and have her decisions. And just fuck Forrest.
I was really upset with Forrest too. He should have given her a choice, and he should have recognized if he had been keeping an eye on her and knew where she was and what she was doing, he should have known how important Roman was to her, and he should have helped her save him as well.
Absolutely. I think I have read so many enemies to lovers that have a twist and turn with a betrayal from the male lead that I was expecting in this situation. I was freaking out thinking, oh my god, Kit is going to betray her. I was about to be really mad because that was not the motivation we get from him in the chapters. But I've read so many of these that it was kind of ingrained in my head that something happened and Kit betrayed her, or that there was another side to the war and that Dacre's army actually was good. But I'm so glad it was not that scenario and it was what it was. But, just Forrest.
I did not expect the betrayal to come from Forrest.
I was expecting her to meet up with him eventually in this war toward the end of the book, and that maybe she would rescue him or something along those lines, but not that he would be part of Dacre's army. Now, the instant he was revealed that he was part of Dacre's army, that he was in this gas mask, I had two trains of thoughts, right? He was ultimately persuaded by Dacre, and he just was a low moral person that was willing to take whatever side. But I didn't get that sense from him based on Iris's perception of him. So then my train went to when she saw the scar on Forrest and said he should be dead. The moment clicked where I said, Dacre is building an army of the dead. It's not quite that extreme, but I wrote down that he is building an army through mind manipulation. Now, how those details work, I was a little off on, but I was really proud of myself because I'm typically terrible at theorizing those kind of plot things. And so going from there, my theory for book 2, when I finish, would be, okay, Iris is going to go to Enva and look for Roman together. Now, that's a different story. That is a different book. We are not talking about Ruthless Vows on here. But I followed the train incorrectly once again.
I didn't know what to think with this cliffhanger ending. I was really worried for Roman. I was worried for Iris and what it would mean for her to lose Roman. So I really just broke it down to, okay, let's recap what we know. Forrest has these wounds that should have been fatal. He initially went into the war fighting for Enva. He ended up fighting for Dacre and then deserting. And he said that fighting for Dacre wasn't his choice and it took everything to break free. What does that mean? Why did it take everything to break free? Is he talking about mind control? Is he talking about some sort of physical restraint? So it was clear to me that Dacre was building an army. Other than that, I had nothing in terms of theorizing.
So initially, when you found out that Forrest was in this gas mask and fighting for Dacre, did you think it was of his own accord?
I did. Not that he wanted to fight for Dacre, but I thought he was being a coward and he switched sides to save himself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
then he showed up to save Iris.
Yes. I was also a little irritated with Iris at the end for a second when, and it's her brother, so I have to give her a little grace on this, but the moment when Forrest says, please don't leave me, and she tells him, I won't, I wrote in all caps when I annotated that, you better fucking run.
I was also really frustrated with Forrest because he kept telling Iris that he knew more about the situation that she did. He has all of this information, but it's not safe to talk about. And he couldn't give her any explanation for what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she had to have some trust in him in that moment that I don't think he deserved. Obviously, for the story, it was better that she followed him and learned this information. And it's not Iris's nature to just hurl headfirst into danger. She leans more toward a helping nature in a dangerous situation. And it was not going to be her nature to just run off and go try to find Roman and save him. She's smart. She's got her wits about her. She took the time, knew that he was likely still alive and that she needed to take that pause and regather her thoughts and feelings and address how to save him in a smarter move. And that was obviously the much better call. But in the heat of the moment, I was like, Iris, go get your man.
She did try to go back and find him, though, and all she found was a circular ring in the ground around where she left him.
Yes, that is true.
Forrest convinced her to leave with the promise that they would go back and look for Roman when it was safe.
And that's obviously the safer, better option and sets us up for book 2. So Tegan, I want to know, and this is what we always like to discuss at the end of our discussion questions, is what were our favorite moments of Divine Rivals?
I could not pick just one. I had so many favorite moments in this book.
I mean, it was a top 5 read for you this year, so I'm not surprised.
It was. One of my favorite moments was the one seat trope, which was a unique twist on the one bed trope that we see in romance novels. You know, usually they walk into a hotel room or something and oops, there's only one bed. Guess we'll have to sleep together. So I really appreciated Rebecca Ross had a one seat trope where there was only one seat on the lorry to take them to the front lines. So Iris had to sit on Roman's lap the entire way.
I loved that. And I think that goes to show that this very much is a YA book, because if that scene happened in a new adult or even adult fantasy book, different thought processes would have been going through the characters' heads.
That is a valid point.
Or more descriptive thought processes.
But we digress.
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite moments was when Iris wrote a little letter of encouragement to herself. She said, "Dear Iris, you don't know what's coming in the days ahead, and you're doing just fine. You are so much stronger than you think, than you feel. Don't be afraid. Keep going." That was such an endearing moment for me.
It was so beautiful.
I also thought it was really amusing when they were in the trenches. Iris was trying to read the letter that she then thought was from Carver, where he revealed his identity to her, and Roman was trying to distract her from reading the letter because he knew it wasn't a good time for her to find out.
I was so mad in that moment. I marked an annotation. I said, "God damn it, Roman!" My favorite moment of the book was actually, it was in that moment, but more specifically following right after that, when she is talking to Roman, or more specifically writing to Roman, because they can't be talking in the trenches and have to be quiet. And Roman is writing Iris and essentially putting himself down. He's talking about Carver's letter and almost trying to challenge Iris, and he says, quote, "He'll mention something about books or newspaper articles because surely by now he knows your writing is exquisite, and above all, he knows that he doesn't deserve you and your words, and he never will." And I loved this because, one, it's kind of like this unknowing confession, and I love that it plays on the dichotomy that is Roman, that is the Carver side of him and the Kit side of him. And it was just beautiful because Iris has no idea that this is like essentially a confession to her that he knows that he doesn't deserve her but loves her anyway.
My heart melted in that moment. That was so sweet when he wrote that to her.
I just had to set my book down and that's exactly what I did right there. It just like, ugh. Then my other favorite moment was right at the end when she gets back home and she sees the letter on the floor that she did not read before going to the war front. And it is Kit telling her that it's me, it's Kit, don't go to the war. Even though you kind of suspect that's what it is, that feeling just kind of drives home that he is missing and that he could have changed the whole dynamic of the last 3/4 of the book in that situation.
That was a really powerful moment that I felt really tied everything together and filled us with anticipation to find out what happened in the second book.
So I think ultimately we devoured this book. We cannot recommend it enough. And if you have not read it, and even if we have spoiled some endings for you, it is still worth a read 1,000%.
All right. That's all we have for our discussion today. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear your thoughts on Divine Rivals and whether you've read Ruthless Vows. If you would like to connect with us, please consider following us on TikTok and Instagram. We are at Influenced Book Podcast on both platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate us wherever you get your podcasts.
We are looking forward to our next episode, particularly me, because we will be discussing The Road of Bones by Demi Winters. This book is a hidden gem, so I am so excited to talk about it. Until next time, happy reading!